Christmas morning in suburban Denver. I stand in my kitchen, hands trembling as I decorate sugar cookies shaped like stars and angels. Trevor leans against the granite countertop, smirking while scrolling through his phone, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Madison will be at Christmas dinner today. Try not to make it awkward. Behave yourself for once. His words slice through the festive atmosphere like a blade through silk. I force a smile, nodding sweetly while my heart pounds. Of course, honey. I want everyone to have a wonderful time. What Trevor doesn't know is that I sent my own special invitation 3 days ago. 6 weeks earlier, everything changed in the span of 30 seconds. I was stripping our bed to wash the Christmas-themed sheets when something glinted beneath Trevor's pillow. A delicate silver earring caught the morning light, definitely not mine. My hands went numb as I held it up, examining the intricate Celtic knot design. I owned nothing like this elegant piece that screamed expensive taste and careful selection. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it belonged to Amy, Trevor's sister, though she rarely visited our bedroom. Perhaps it fell from someone's coat at our last dinner party. I invented dozens of innocent explanations while standing there in our master bedroom, still wearing my pink cotton pajamas, holding proof of my husband's betrayal. But denial only lasted until I started looking deeper. Trevor had been working late for months, claiming new clients demanded evening meetings. He'd developed a sudden interest in fitness, joining an upscale gym across town instead of using our home equipment. His phone never left his side anymore, and he'd changed his passcode from our anniversary date to something I couldn't guess. I called my former colleague Linda at Hartman, Moore and Associates, the law firm where I'd worked as a paralegal before marrying Trevor. Linda specialized in divorce cases and knew how to find information without leaving digital fingerprints. "Bridget, sweetie, are you sure you want to know?" Linda asked during our coffee meeting at a cafe, far from Trevor's usual haunts. "I have to know, Linda. I can't live in this uncertainty anymore." Within a week, Linda's private investigator friend had compiled a devastating portfolio. Hotel receipts dating back 8 months. Credit card statements showing jewelry purchases I'd never received. Restaurant bills for 2, at places Trevor claimed to be meeting male business associates. The worst discovery came when I recovered Trevor's deleted text messages from our shared cloud storage account that he'd forgotten to remove me from. Hundreds of exchanges with Madison revealed not just physical intimacy, but emotional connection I thought belonged exclusively to our marriage. "Can't wait to start our real life together after the holidays," one message read. "Bridget has no idea what's coming. You'll love Costa Rica in January." My world tilted sideways. Costa Rica. Trevor had never mentioned any vacation plans with me. My hands shook as I scrolled through more messages, each one revealing deeper layers of deception. Madison wasn't just his mistress, she was his exit strategy. I'd met Madison twice before, at Trevor's company parties. She worked in marketing for a competing real estate firm, stunning in that effortless way that made other women feel inadequate. Tall, blonde, confident, she commanded attention simply by existing. I'd felt small beside her both times, though Trevor had seemed merely professional in their interactions. Now I understood those interactions were performances for my benefit. The final devastating blow came through Madison's social media accounts, which she'd made public in a moment of poor judgment. Her latest Instagram post, dated 3 days earlier, showed a sonogram photo with the caption, "Our little miracle arriving this summer. Dreams really do come true." She was pregnant with Trevor's child. I sat in my car outside the coffee shop where Linda and I had met, staring at that image until my vision blurred. Trevor and I had been trying to have children for 2 years. He'd blamed my stress levels, my age, anything except the possibility that he simply didn't want children with me. But he wanted them with her. The Trevor I'd married 6 years ago was a charismatic real estate agent, with big dreams and bigger promises. I'd supported those dreams by quitting my paralegal job to manage his business operations, handle his books, coordinate his marketing efforts. I'd made myself financially dependent on a man who was planning to abandon me completely. But Trevor had made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated exactly how much I'd learned during my years investigating legal cases. And he had no idea that my need for justice burned stronger than my need to save face. I drove home that evening and prepared dinner as usual, setting the table with our wedding china, pouring Trevor's favorite wine, acting the part of the devoted wife while my mind calculated every move of the plan forming in my thoughts. Trevor arrived home at 8:30, claiming traffic delays, kissing my cheek with lips that had been on another woman. "How was your day, beautiful?" he asked, the endearment now sounding hollow and practiced. "Wonderful," I replied, serving his plate with a smile that felt like wearing a mask. "I've been thinking about Christmas dinner, making sure everything's perfect for your family. Madison will be joining us this year," he said casually, cutting into his steak. "Her family's traveling, and I thought it would be nice to include her." The audacity left me breathless. He was inviting his pregnant mistress to Christmas dinner with his parents, his sister, his wife. The level of disrespect was so profound it almost impressed me. "That's very thoughtful of you," I managed to say. "The more the merrier." That night, after Trevor fell asleep, I began planning my own Christmas invitation list. My investigation into Trevor's life revealed secrets that went far beyond adultery. Using the research skills that had made me an excellent paralegal, I discovered financial improprieties that painted my husband as more than unfaithful. He was a criminal. The breakthrough came when I referenced Trevor's business bank accounts with public records of his former partnerships. 3 years ago, Trevor had owned Morrison Construction with a man named Jake Morrison. According to incorporation documents, they'd been equal partners in a thriving residential building company. According to current records, Jake Morrison was working 2 jobs: night security at a warehouse and weekend landscaping, while Trevor drove a BMW and lived in our 4-bedroom colonial. I found Jake's contact information through the security company's employee directory. My hands trembled as I dialed his number on a Thursday afternoon while Trevor was supposedly showing houses to clients. Jake Morrison speaking. "Mr. Morrison, my name is Bridget Harrison. I believe you knew my husband, Trevor Harrison, from your construction business." The silence stretched so long I wondered if he'd hung up. "Ma'am, I don't know what Trevor told you about our business, but he told me nothing. That's why I'm calling. I think my husband stole money from you, and I think I can prove it." Another pause. Then, "Could we meet somewhere? This isn't something I want to discuss over the phone." We arranged to meet at a diner on the outskirts of town, far from any place Trevor might visit. Jake Morrison turned out to be a weathered man in his 40s, wearing work clothes that had seen better days. Deep lines etched his face, and his hands bore the calluses of manual labor. But his eyes held intelligence and a weariness that spoke of profound betrayal. "Trevor and I started Morrison Construction 5 years ago," Jake explained over coffee that had gone cold. "We were building custom homes, making good money. I handled the actual construction. He managed sales and finances." "What happened?" 3 years ago, Trevor said we needed to restructure for tax purposes. Had me sign papers transferring company assets into a holding corporation he'd established. Said it was temporary, just for the year, end tax benefits. Jake's jaw tightened. 2 weeks later, Trevor dissolved our partnership, claiming I'd violated contract terms by working with competing contractors. Complete lies, but he had documentation supporting his claims. How much did he take? $300,000. Our operating capital, client deposits, everything. I couldn't even afford a lawyer to fight him properly. The cruelty of Trevor's betrayal was breathtaking. Jake Morrison was obviously a good man who'd trusted his partner completely. "Why do you work 2 jobs now?" I asked, though I suspected the answer would break my heart. "My daughter Emma has spina bifida. She needed surgery we couldn't afford after Trevor stole our money. The procedures cost more than I make in 2 years. His voice cracked slightly. "She's 14 now. Smart as a whip, wants to be an engineer. But some days she can barely walk. because we can't afford the follow-up treatments she needs. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried for 5 minutes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of Trevor's selfishness. This man's child was suffering because my husband wanted a bigger bank account. When I returned to the table, Jake was studying my face carefully. "Why are you doing this? Why risk your marriage to help a stranger?" "Because Trevor's planning to leave me for another woman, and because what he did to you is unforgivable." I slid a folder across the table. "These are copies of bank records showing where your money went. Trevor's been hiding it in offshore accounts, planning to disappear after the holidays." Jake opened the folder, his face growing darker with each page. "How did you get these?" "Trevor never removed me from our business cloud storage. I have access to everything: bank statements, email correspondence, even recordings of phone calls where he bragged about outmaneuvering you. This could put him in prison. That's exactly where he belongs. But first, I want him to pay for what he did to your family. Are you willing to help me make that happen?" Jake Morrison looked me straight in the eye. "Ma'am, I've been waiting 3 years for this chance. Tell me what you need." Over the next 2 hours, we planned Trevor's public humiliation. Jake would attend our Christmas dinner as my specially invited guest. In front of Trevor's parents, sister, and pregnant mistress, he would expose everything. Trevor would face his victims while surrounded by family, forced to confront the reality of his choices with nowhere to hide. But Jake's revelation added an even more shocking dimension to Madison's involvement. "Your husband's girlfriend," Jake said carefully. "Madison something. She wasn't just aware of what Trevor did to me. She helped him hide the money." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "Trevor needed someone with clean credit to open the offshore accounts. Madison's signature is on half the transfer documents. She's been his partner in this fraud from the beginning. The pregnancy, the love affair, the business relationship. Madison hadn't simply fallen for a married man. She'd targeted Trevor specifically for his willingness to steal and his access to money. They'd been planning this escape together, using stolen funds to start their new life. I thought I'd discovered the depths of Trevor's betrayal, but there were layers I hadn't even imagined. "Jake, how would you feel about spending Christmas dinner with the people who destroyed your family?" He smiled grimly. "I think it's about time they met the consequences of their actions." The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. I maintained my role as the perfect wife, decorating our house for Christmas, shopping for gifts, preparing elaborate menus. But underneath the domestic facade, I was assembling the evidence that would destroy Trevor's life as thoroughly as he'd destroyed Jake Morrison's. I contacted a divorce attorney and filed papers, though I asked them to delay service until after Christmas. I wanted Trevor to face criminal charges first, then deal with the civil consequences. Linda helped me document everything legally, ensuring our evidence would hold up in court. We had bank records, email correspondence, recorded phone conversations, and Jake's sworn testimony. Trevor had been so confident in his superiority that he'd never bothered to cover his tracks properly. The irony was delicious. The man who'd spent months calling me naive and trusting had been completely blind to my investigation. 3 days before Christmas, I sent Jake Morrison a formal invitation to Christmas dinner, along with a manila envelope containing copies of all our evidence. "Bring this with you," I wrote in the accompanying note. "It's time for Trevor to meet the man whose life he destroyed." Trevor never suspected anything. He was too busy coordinating with Madison, planning their post-holiday disappearance, probably counting stolen money in his head. But Christmas morning was coming, and with it, the reckoning Trevor Harrison had been avoiding for 3 years. Christmas morning dawned crisp and bright, the kind of perfect Colorado winter day that belonged on greeting cards. I woke before Trevor, slipping downstairs to start coffee and begin the elaborate breakfast spread I'd planned. Every detail had to be perfect for what would unfold later. Trevor's parents arrived first, Carol and Frank Harrison carrying their usual collection of expensive gifts and high expectations. Carol had never warmed to me completely, always maintaining polite distance while clearly preferring Madison's sophisticated charm during their previous encounters at office parties. Frank was more diplomatic but equally reserved, treating me like acceptable furniture in his son's life. "Bridget, dear, you look lovely," Carol said, kissing my cheeks while surveying the living room decorations with critical approval. "I do hope you've prepared enough food." Trevor mentioned Madison would be joining us. "Of course. I'm so excited to have her here," I replied, adjusting the red poinsettias on the mantelpiece. "It'll be wonderful to get to know her better." Amy arrived next with her husband Paul and their twin boys, 7-year-old Matthew and Marcus. Amy had always been kind to me, though our relationship remained surface-level pleasant. The children immediately gravitated toward the presents under the tree, their excitement filling the house with genuine Christmas joy that felt surreal given what I knew was coming. Trevor descended the stairs, looking particularly pleased with himself, wearing the cashmere sweater I'd given him early that morning. He kissed me briefly, more for his parents' benefit than from any genuine affection. "Everything smells incredible, babe. You've really outdone yourself this year." "I wanted today to be special," I said, the truth of that statement carrying weight he couldn't comprehend. The morning proceeded, with gift exchanges and family photos, everyone playing their assigned roles in what appeared to be a perfect family Christmas. I watched Trevor laugh with his nephews, hug his parents, pose for pictures that would probably be evidence in divorce proceedings. The man had no idea these were the last moments of his carefully constructed life. Madison arrived at 11:30, fashionably late as always, carrying an expensive handbag and wearing a flowing green dress that artfully concealed her pregnancy while somehow making her glow with health and beauty. She'd clearly dressed to impress Trevor's family, staking her claim as his future. "I'm so sorry I'm late," Madison announced, accepting Carol's enthusiastic embrace. "Traffic was absolutely horrible." Trevor moved to her side immediately, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture so intimate it made my stomach clench. Right there in my living room, in front of his family, he was claiming her publicly. "Madison, you remember my wife Bridget," Trevor said with casual cruelty, emphasizing the word wife like it was a temporary inconvenience. "Of course. Bridget, thank you so much for including me today. I know how important family traditions are." Madison's smile was perfectly calibrated, warm enough to seem genuine, confident enough to establish her position, sympathetic enough to suggest she understood the awkwardness of the situation. She was skilled at manipulation, I had to admit. "Any friend of Trevor's is family to us," I replied sweetly, leading everyone toward the dining room. "I've prepared his favorite dishes." The house filled with conversation and laughter as we gathered around the table I'd set with our wedding china and crystal. Carol dominated the discussion with updates about neighbors and social events. Frank shared fishing stories from his recent trip to Montana. Amy kept the twins entertained while Paul discussed football with Trevor. Madison inserted herself seamlessly into every conversation, displaying knowledge about topics ranging from real estate markets to child development. She was clearly intelligent and well-educated, which somehow made her participation in Trevor's crimes even more contemptible. I served course after course of comfort food honey, glazed ham, roasted vegetables, homemade rolls, all the dishes Trevor had requested. Playing the perfect hostess while watching my husband flaunt his pregnant mistress required acting skills I hadn't known I possessed. "Bridget, this meal is absolutely divine," Madison said, touching her still flat stomach, in a gesture designed to hint at her condition without announcing it outright. "I don't know how you manage to cook like this and maintain your figure." The backhanded compliment was expertly delivered, establishing Madison as the appreciative guest while subtly suggesting I had weight issues. Trevor's approving nod made it clear he'd caught and appreciated the insult. "Just good genes, I suppose," I replied, "though I've been so busy lately with Christmas preparations, making sure everything's perfect for Trevor's special announcement." Trevor's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What announcement?" "Oh, silly me. I thought you'd want to share your news with the family today. I smiled innocently. About your exciting plans for the new year. Madison's face went pale, clearly wondering what I knew and how much I might reveal. Trevor recovered quickly, laughing off my comment. You know, Bridget. Always making things sound more dramatic than they are. The doorbell chimed at exactly 12:45, the precise time I'd specified in my invitation. My heart hammered as I excused myself to answer the door, feeling Trevor's eyes follow me from the dining room. Jake Morrison stood on my front porch wearing clean jeans and a button-down shirt, clearly his best clothes, carrying the manila envelope I'd sent him. His weathered face was grim but determined, like a man prepared to finally settle an old debt. Mr. Morrison, thank you so much for coming, I said loudly enough for the dining room to hear. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Jake Morrison, an old friend I thought should join our celebration. I led Jake into the dining room, watching Trevor's face drain of all color as he recognized his former business partner. The man he'd stolen from, abandoned, and probably assumed he'd never see again, was standing in his dining room on Christmas Day, holding evidence of his crimes. Madison's wineglass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the floor and staining her expensive dress with red liquid. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in the room, though most of them didn't yet understand what they were witnessing. Trevor, Jake said quietly, his voice carrying 3 years of suppressed anger. Been a while. The room fell absolutely silent, except for the twins' continued chatter in the living room where they'd gone to play with their new toys. Carol and Frank exchanged confused glances, clearly sensing tension but unable to identify its source. Amy's maternal instincts kicked in as she moved closer to the living room, ready to protect her children from whatever was about to unfold. Trevor attempted damage control, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. Jake. What a surprise. What are you doing here? I invited him, I said cheerfully, beginning to clear Madison's broken glass. I thought it was time you two reconnected, especially considering all the unfinished business between you. Madison had gone completely silent, staring at Jake like he was a ghost, materializing from her worst nightmares. She understood exactly who he was and what his presence meant for her carefully planned future. Well, Carol said, attempting to restore normal conversation, any friend of Bridget's is welcome at our table. Please, join us, Mr. Morrison. Jake remained standing, his eyes never leaving Trevor's face. Thank you, ma'am. But first, I think Trevor and I need to discuss some business matters that affect everyone in this room. The Christmas dinner I'd spent weeks planning had officially become something else entirely. The perfect family gathering was about to transform into a public trial, with Trevor Harrison as the defendant and his own family as the jury. Trevor's perfect life was about to come crashing down, and for the first time in months, I felt genuinely excited about what was coming next. Jake Morrison surveyed the elegant dining room, taking in the crystal chandelier, expensive artwork, and lavish Christmas spread. His weathered hands gripped the manila envelope tighter as his eyes returned to Trevor's pale face. 3 years ago, Trevor and I were business partners, Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. We built homes together, created something we were both proud of. At least, I thought we were both proud. Carol reached for Frank's hand, sensing catastrophe approaching. Amy quietly moved toward the living room doorway, positioning herself between her children and whatever revelations were coming. Mr. Morrison, Trevor interrupted, his voice strained but attempting authority. This isn't the time or place for business discussions. We're trying to have a family Christmas here. Family Christmas, Jake repeated, his laugh bitter and sharp. That's interesting, Trevor, considering you stole the money I needed for my family's Christmas. And every Christmas since. Madison shifted in her chair, her designer dress rustling against the upholstery. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by the rigid posture of someone preparing for impact. Jake, please. Trevor tried again. You're upset, I understand, but you're embarrassing yourself. These people don't need to hear your conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories? Jake opened the manila envelope, pulling out bank statements and transfer documents. Is that what you call signed paperwork with your name on it? Frank Harrison, a retired accountant who'd built his reputation on financial integrity, leaned forward with sudden interest. What kind of paperwork, son? Jake spread documents across the dining table, pushing aside Christmas dishes to make room for evidence of fraud. Bank transfers totaling $300,000, moved from our joint business accounts into offshore holdings under Trevor's sole control. That's not true, Trevor protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Sweat had appeared on his forehead, despite the comfortable room temperature. Your signature's right here, Trevor. Jake pointed to specific lines on transfer forms. And here. And here. You authorized every single transaction. Carol gasped, reading over Frank's shoulder as he examined the documents with the thoroughness of someone who understood financial records intimately. Trevor. Frank's voice was low and dangerous. Please explain these signatures. They're forgeries, Trevor said desperately. Jake's been obsessed with me for years. This is some kind of elaborate revenge fantasy. Then explain this. Jake produced his phone, pressing play on an audio recording. Trevor's voice filled the dining room, clear and unmistakable. Jake never saw it coming. The idiot signed everything I put in front of him. $300,000, clean and legal, transferred before he even realized what happened. Sometimes I can't believe how easy it was. Madison's face went ashen, as she recognized the voice of a different man in the recording responding. And Madison set up the offshore accounts like you asked? Perfect paper trail leading nowhere. She's got clean credit, no connection to the original business. We're completely covered. Trevor lunged toward Jake's phone, but the recording continued playing. What about Jake's kid? I heard she's sick. Trevor's recorded laugh was cruel and dismissive. Not my problem. Should have thought about that before trusting me with his money. The silence that followed was deafening. Carol's hand flew to her mouth, tears already streaming down her cheeks. Frank stared at his son like he was seeing a stranger. Amy had gone completely rigid, her protective instincts warring with shock at hearing her brother's callousness. My daughter Emma, Jake said quietly, has spina bifida. The surgery she needed cost more than I could afford after your son stole our business. She's 14 now, confined to a wheelchair most days because I can't afford the follow-up treatments. Carol began sobbing openly. Frank stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Trevor Michael Harrison, Frank's voice shook with rage. Tell me this isn't true. Trevor looked around the table desperately, seeking support that had evaporated completely. Dad, you have to understand. Business is complicated. Jake doesn't understand the legal aspects of what happened. I understand theft, Jake replied. I understand a man who steals money from his partner and doesn't care that partner's child suffers for it. Madison finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. Trevor, you told me Jake had agreed to dissolve the partnership. Madison, don't, Trevor warned, recognizing the danger of her speaking. But Madison's survival instincts had kicked in. With the evidence spread before them, she saw only one path to minimize her own legal exposure. I never knew about the daughter, she said louder, turning to address the family. Trevor told me Jake was a bad partner who'd agreed to sell his share. He said the money transfer was completely legal. You helped him hide it, Jake accused, producing another document. Your signature is on every offshore account. He lied to me too, Madison insisted, tears beginning to flow. Trevor, tell them. Tell them you lied to me about everything. The pregnant mistress was throwing Trevor under the bus to save herself, and everyone in the room could see it happening. Madison, stop talking, Trevor commanded, his voice taking on a threatening edge. No, Trevor. I'm not going to prison because you're a criminal. Madison stood unsteadily, her hand on her stomach. I thought I was helping with legitimate business restructuring. You told me Jake was trying to steal from you. Amy spoke for the first time since Jake's arrival, her voice cold with disgust. So you helped my brother hide stolen money because you believed his lies? I believed the man I loved, Madison snapped, then immediately seemed to realize her mistake. The man you loved? Carol's voice was sharp despite her tears. What exactly is your relationship with my son? Trevor's perfect plan was unraveling in real time. His pregnant mistress was confessing their affair to save herself from criminal prosecution, while his parents discovered he was both a thief and an adulterer. Mom, Dad, I can explain everything, Trevor tried desperately. Can you explain why your business partner's disabled daughter can't afford medical treatment because you stole her father's money? Frank's voice was deadly quiet. Can you explain why you're apparently involved with this woman while married to Bridget? Jake pulled out one more document, the final nail in Trevor's coffin. Medical bills from Children's Hospital, Emma's surgical costs, follow-up treatments, physical therapy sessions, all unpaid because Trevor Harrison decided his greed was more important than a child's health. The sight of medical bills for a 14-year-old girl broke Carol completely. She turned to Bridget with tears streaming down her face. Bridget, honey, did you know about any of this? I found out 6 weeks ago, I said simply. That's when I invited Jake to Christmas dinner. I thought Trevor should face the consequences of his choices in front of the people who love him. Trevor's face contorted with rage as he realized the scope of my betrayal. You planned this. You conniving. I planned justice, I interrupted calmly. Something you've been avoiding for 3 years. Jake gathered the documents back into his envelope, his mission accomplished. I filed police reports 3 years ago, but didn't have enough evidence. Thanks to Bridget, I now have everything I need to press criminal charges. Criminal charges? Madison's voice cracked with panic. Wire fraud? Embezzlement? Money laundering? Jake counted off charges on his fingers. Federal crimes, both of you. 5 to 10 years minimum. Trevor lunged across the table toward Jake, but Frank caught his son's arm. Sit down, Frank commanded with authority Trevor hadn't heard since childhood. You've embarrassed this family enough. As Trevor sank back into his chair, defeated and exposed, the Christmas tree lights continued twinkling merrily in the background, a surreal contrast to the destruction of a family's faith in their own son. But the revelations weren't over. Jake Morrison had one more truth bomb to detonate, and it was going to destroy Madison's final lie. I moved calmly to the kitchen island, where I'd hidden a recording device earlier that morning, retrieving it with the composure of someone who'd planned every moment of this confrontation. Jake has shared his truth, I announced, returning to the dining room with the small device in my palm. Now let me share mine. Trevor's eyes fixed on the recorder with growing horror. Bridget, what is that? 3 weeks of conversations, Trevor. Every lie you've told, every confession you've made, every detail of your plans to abandon me. I pressed play, and Trevor's voice filled the room again. Bridget's so pathetic, thinking we're trying for kids when I've been getting vasectomy consultations. The last thing I want is to be tied to her forever with children. Carol gasped audibly, understanding immediately that her son had been actively preventing the grandchildren she'd been hoping for. The recording continued. Madison's pregnancy changes everything. Now we have a real reason to start fresh in Costa Rica. Clean slate, new identities if necessary. Frank's face had gone beyond anger into a cold fury that promised permanent consequences. New identities? He repeated slowly. It gets worse, Dad. I fast-forwarded to another recorded conversation. This was last Tuesday. Trevor's voice emerged again. The old man's been asking about our retirement accounts. Good thing he has no idea I've been borrowing against his inheritance to fund the offshore transfers. Frank Harrison stood so abruptly, his chair toppled backward. You touched my inheritance money? Dad, let me explain. You stole from your business partner's sick child and from your own parents? Frank's voice shook with disbelief. I produced a folder from the sideboard, spreading financial documents across what remained of our Christmas table. Trevor's been using your parents' information to secure loans, Dad. Nearly $50,000 borrowed against properties he doesn't own. Carol began hyperventilating, and Amy rushed to help her mother while keeping one eye on her children in the next room. There's more, I continued mercilessly. Madison, tell everyone about your previous marriage? Madison's face went white. I don't know what you mean. The marriage to Robert Chen that ended 18 months ago under similar circumstances? The financial fraud charges that were dropped when you disappeared to another state? I pulled out printed pages from social media and court records. Her real name is Madison Walsh Chen. She's wanted in California for embezzling from her ex-husband's medical practice. That's not true, Madison protested weakly. Show them the pregnancy test, Madison, I demanded. What pregnancy test? Trevor asked, confusion adding to his panic. The fake one. Tell them about the baby that doesn't exist. Madison bolted for the door, but Jake Morrison blocked her path with the calm determination of someone who'd waited 3 years for justice. Going somewhere? He asked mildly. The medical records, I explained to the stunned family, show that Madison had a hysterectomy 2 years ago, following complications from endometriosis. There is no baby. There never was. Trevor stared at Madison in complete bewilderment. What is she talking about? You showed me the sonogram. Stock photo from the internet? I replied. Madison needed you committed to the escape plan, so she invented the pregnancy to ensure your loyalty. Madison's composure finally cracked completely. Everything I did was to survive. Trevor promised me a new life, financial security. How was I supposed to know he was lying about everything else too? So you lied about being pregnant to manipulate him into abandoning his wife? Amy's voice carried maternal outrage on behalf of women everywhere. It's not that simple, Madison sobbed. Actually, it is exactly that simple, I said. You targeted my husband specifically because you research successful men to exploit. Trevor was just your latest victim. I produced printed emails from Madison's account, recovered through legal discovery processes Linda had helped me navigate. Background research on Trevor Harrison, including financial assets, family connections, and potential weaknesses. Date: stamped 8 months before you supposedly met at that conference. Trevor was staring at Madison like she'd grown horns. You planned this entire relationship? I planned a future, Madison snapped, her false sweetness finally abandoned. Something better than waiting tables and dodging creditors. By stealing from children, Jake said quietly. The weight of that statement settled over the room like smoke. Madison Walsh, Chen, whatever her real name was, had participated in stealing money that belonged to a disabled teenager's medical care. Carol Harrison, who'd been sobbing quietly, suddenly stood and walked directly to Jake Morrison. How much does your daughter's surgery cost? She asked, her voice thick but determined. Ma'am? Emma's surgery. The follow-up treatments. How much does she need? Jake looked uncomfortable discussing money in front of strangers. Mrs. Harrison, you don't need to. How much? She insisted. About $80,000 total, including the physical therapy. Carol turned to her husband. Frank, we're paying for that child's medical care immediately. Frank began. No argument. Our son did this. Our family will fix it. She faced Trevor with a mixture of love and disappointment that was devastating to witness. The money comes out of your inheritance, Trevor. Every penny of it. Trevor had lost his criminal accomplice, his stolen money, his parents' respect, and now his inheritance in the span of 30 minutes. But there's one more thing, I said softly, saving the best revelation for last. I walked to the front door and retrieved an envelope from the mail slot where I'd placed it earlier that morning. Divorce papers, Trevor. Filed 3 days ago, along with criminal complaints for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. The papers scattered across the table like autumn leaves, each document representing another aspect of Trevor's life being legally dismantled. I've also frozen all joint accounts, canceled shared credit cards, and changed the locks on the house. You have no access to any marital assets pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. Trevor stared at the divorce papers with the expression of someone watching their own execution. The prenup you insisted I sign? I continued. Null and void due to your criminal activity. I get everything, Trevor. The house, the business, even the BMW you thought you were so clever to put in my name for tax purposes. Madison made another desperate attempt to escape, but Amy had moved to block the other exit. Where do you think you're going? Amy demanded. This is insane. You people are all insane, Madison screamed. We're just getting started, I replied calmly. The doorbell rang again, and Trevor's face went from pale to green. Expecting someone else? I asked sweetly, moving toward the door. 2 men in suits stood on my porch, badges visible in their jacket pockets. Detective Rodriguez, Detective Santos. I greeted them warmly. Right on time. Trevor Harrison's Christmas had just become a nightmare he'd never wake up from. Detective Rodriguez, a compact man with graying temples, and Detective Santos, younger with sharp eyes that missed nothing, entered my dining room like they were stepping into a crime scene, which, legally speaking, they were. Mrs. Harrison, thank you for coordinating with our investigation, Detective Rodriguez said, his voice professionally courteous but carrying an underlying satisfaction. Miss Morrison, thank you for your patience with our timeline. Jake Morrison nodded grimly. I've been patient for 3 years, Detective. A few more hours didn't matter. Trevor shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. Bridget, what have you done? What you should have done 3 years ago, I replied. Faced the consequences of your choices. Detective Santos surveyed the room, taking note of the scattered financial documents, the broken wine glass, Madison cowering near the window, and the family gathered around evidence of fraud. Trevor Harrison, Detective Rodriguez began, pulling out handcuffs. You're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering in connection with the theft of funds from Morrison Construction. This is Christmas Day, Trevor protested desperately. You can't arrest someone on Christmas. Crime doesn't take holidays, Mr. Harrison, Detective Santos replied, moving toward Madison. Madison Walsh, Chen, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and accessory to embezzlement. Madison's scream pierced the air. I want a lawyer. I'm not saying anything without a lawyer. That's your right, Detective Rodriguez confirmed while securing Trevor's hands behind his back. You'll have plenty of time to call one from the station. Carol Harrison watched her son being handcuffed in her presence, tears streaming down her face but her spine straight with painful dignity. Frank stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, both of them aging visibly as they witnessed the destruction of their family's reputation. Mom, Dad, please, Trevor begged as the handcuffs clicked into place. I can explain everything. This is all a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, Frank said quietly, was thinking we'd raised a man of character. Amy had moved her children into the living room, but Matthew and Marcus peered around the doorway with wide eyes, too young to understand the legal proceedings, but old enough to sense the gravity of adults in crisis. Uncle Trevor, why are the police here? Matthew asked innocently. Trevor's face crumpled as he realized his nephews were watching him being arrested. Whatever defiance had sustained him evaporated completely. Detective Santos was reading Madison her rights, while she continued demanding legal representation. Her earlier sophistication had vanished, replaced by raw panic, as she understood that her criminal record in multiple states had finally caught up with her. Detective Rodriguez, I said, approaching with additional documentation. These are copies of all evidence we've compiled. Financial records, recorded conversations, testimony from victims. Mrs. Harrison, your cooperation has been invaluable to this investigation. Mr. Morrison's initial reports gave us the framework, but your evidence provided the details we needed for prosecution. Jake Morrison approached Trevor as the detectives prepared to transport their prisoners. Trevor, Emma wanted me to give you a message. Trevor looked up hopefully, perhaps expecting childhood innocence to offer forgiveness. She said she hopes prison teaches you why stealing from sick kids is wrong. The words hit Trevor like physical blows. A 14-year-old girl who'd suffered because of his greed had summoned more dignity than he'd shown in years. "Jake," Trevor began. "Don't." Jake's voice was flat and final. "There's nothing you could say that would matter now." Detective Rodriguez addressed the family gathered around the ruins of Christmas dinner. "We'll need formal statements from everyone who witnessed today's events. The district attorney will likely call this the most well-documented financial fraud case in county history." "When will they be released?" Carol asked quietly. "Ma'am, given the amount of money involved and Miss Walsh-Chen's history of fleeing prosecution, they'll be held without bail pending trial." Frank nodded slowly. "How long before trial?" "Cases this straightforward usually move quickly. 6 months, maybe less." As the detectives led Trevor and Madison toward the door, local news vans were pulling into our driveway. Word of the Christmas Day arrests had apparently reached media outlets hungry for holiday drama. "Mr. Harrison," a reporter called through the window, "any comment on your arrest for embezzling from a disabled child's medical fund?" Trevor's shoulders sagged as he realized his crimes would become public entertainment, his mugshot appearing on evening news broadcasts across the state. Madison tried to hide her face as camera flashes illuminated our front yard, but there was no escaping the documentation of her downfall. "This is a nightmare," Carol whispered. "No," Amy said firmly, moving to support her mother. "This is justice." As the police cars pulled away with their passengers, I found myself standing in my destroyed dining room surrounded by the remnants of the Harrison family Christmas. Broken dishes, scattered legal documents, and tear-stained faces told the story of a family reckoning. Frank Harrison approached me, with the bearing of a man accepting responsibility for his son's actions. "Bridget, I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything, Frank. I raised a son who could steal from a child's medical fund without losing sleep. That failure reflects on me." His voice broke slightly. "You had the courage to expose him when his own family was blind to what he'd become." Carol joined her husband, her tears finally slowing. "Bridget, sweetheart, what will you do now?" I looked around at the chaos Trevor had created, and left behind financial ruin, broken trust, destroyed relationships, criminal charges that would follow him for years. "I'm going to rebuild," I said simply. "Starting with making sure Emma Morrison gets the medical care she needs." Jake Morrison was gathering the evidence documents that had accomplished what 3 years of waiting couldn't. "Mrs. Harrison, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me, Jake. Just take care of your daughter. And maybe we can work together to make sure Trevor pays full restitution to everyone he hurt." As news crews set up equipment in my front yard and neighbors gathered to witness the scandal unfolding in their quiet suburban neighborhood, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Trevor Harrison had finally met the consequences of his choices, and the people he'd hurt were finally going to receive justice. But this was just the beginning of a much longer journey toward healing and rebuilding lives, destroyed by greed and betrayal. The real work started tomorrow. 6 months later, I stood in the morning sunshine outside the newly opened Morrison and Associates construction office, watching Jake Morrison teach his daughter Emma how to operate the hydraulic controls on a wheelchair, accessible workbench he'd designed specifically for her use. Emma Morrison was nothing like I'd imagined from her medical files. Despite months of painful treatments, she radiated intelligence and determination that reminded me why fighting for justice had been worth every sleepless night. Her spina bifida confined her to a wheelchair, but her spirit was absolutely uncontainable. "Mrs. Harrison, watch this," Emma called out, successfully adjusting the bench height to accommodate her wheelchair. "Dad says when I graduate college with my engineering degree, I can redesign all his equipment to be accessible." "That's amazing, Emma. Your father told me you're already taking advanced mathematics courses." "Calculus is easy when you're motivated," she grinned, her father's stubborn determination shining through. "I want to design buildings that work for everyone, not just people who can walk." Jake appeared beside me, coffee in hand, wearing clean work clothes that actually fit properly. The man I'd met in that diner 6 months ago had been hollowed out by years of financial struggle and legal helplessness. This version of Jake Morrison stood straighter, smiled easier, and radiated the confidence of someone who'd reclaimed his professional identity. "Emma's surgery went perfectly," he told me quietly. "The doctors say she'll regain about 60% of her mobility over the next year. More importantly, she won't lose any more function. The physical therapy sessions are helping? 3 times a week, plus the new medications. All covered by the settlement money." Jake's voice carried gratitude mixed with residual amazement. "Bridget, Trevor's restitution payments, are going to fund Emma's care through college." The criminal proceedings had moved with surprising speed. Trevor's defense attorney had advised immediate plea bargains to avoid federal charges that would have tripled his sentence. Trevor Harrison was currently serving 5 years in federal prison for wire fraud and embezzlement. Madison Walsh, Chen received 8 years after prosecutors discovered her involvement in similar schemes across 4 states. More satisfying than their prison sentences was the financial restitution. Trevor had been forced to liquidate every asset, including the BMW, his Rolex collection, and the vacation condo in Aspen he'd purchased with stolen money. Combined with insurance settlements and asset recovery, Jake Morrison had received full compensation plus interest. But the money was only part of Emma's recovery. The real transformation came from watching her father rebuild his professional reputation and personal confidence. "Dad, Mrs. Harrison," Emma called from across the construction yard. "Come see what we're building." Jake led me toward a partially completed house that looked unlike any residential construction I'd seen. Wider doorways, ramped entrances, adjustable counter heights, roll-in showers. Every design element accommodated wheelchair accessibility while maintaining architectural elegance. "Emma designed most of the accessibility features," Jake explained proudly. "We're building the first fully accessible homes in this price range. Already have a waiting list of families who need them." "It's beautiful, Jake. The best part is, we're profitable. Turns out there's huge demand for accessible housing that doesn't look institutional." He gestured toward blueprints spread across a planning table. "Emma's accessibility consulting is going to put her through college." The irony was perfect. Trevor's theft had been intended to fund his selfish escape, but ultimately it had provided Jake and Emma Morrison with resources to build something meaningful that would help other families facing similar challenges. My own reconstruction had proceeded differently but with equal satisfaction. The divorce had awarded me complete ownership of Trevor's real estate business, which I'd immediately restructured. Instead of continuing Trevor's aggressive sales tactics, I'd focused on ethical practices and community involvement. Working with a team that included Linda from the law firm and several former clients who'd been burned by Trevor's dishonesty, I'd rebuilt the business reputation from scratch. We specialized in helping first-time homebuyers, particularly single women and families, with disabled members who'd been overlooked by traditional real estate agents. The business was smaller than Trevor's operation, but far more rewarding. Every client knew they were getting honest advice and fair treatment, which generated referrals that sustained steady growth. More personally, my relationship with Jake had evolved from justice, seeking alliance, into something deeper and more genuine than anything I'd shared with Trevor. Jake Morrison was incapable of the casual cruelty that had characterized my marriage. He treated my intelligence as an asset rather than a threat, valued my opinions, and shared decision-making in ways Trevor never had. "Bridget," Emma said as we finished touring the construction site, "Dad told me you used to be married to the man who stole our money." "That's right, Emma. Were you sad when he went to prison?" Jake looked worried about his daughter's directness, but I appreciated her honesty. "I was sad about what he chose to become," I answered carefully. "But I wasn't sad about justice being served." Emma nodded solemnly. "Dad says you saved our family by being brave enough to do the right thing even when it was hard. Sometimes doing the right thing is the only choice that lets you live with yourself. That's what I want to do when I'm an engineer. Build things that help people, not just things that make money." Jake Morrison beamed at his daughter with pride that could have powered the construction equipment. Emma's clear moral compass and intellectual gifts promised a future limited only by her imagination. The Harrison family had undergone their own process of healing and accountability. Carol and Frank had honored their commitment to fund Emma's medical care, establishing a scholarship fund for disabled students pursuing engineering degrees. Amy maintained regular contact with me, our relationship strengthened by shared experience of loving someone whose choices had disappointed us profoundly. Trevor's parents had visited him twice in prison, but according to Carol, he remained focused on minimizing his own suffering rather than acknowledging the harm he'd caused others. Some people learn from consequences. Others simply endure them. Madison Walsh. Chen had attempted to appeal her conviction by claiming abuse and manipulation, but evidence of her previous criminal history had demolished any sympathy from the judicial system. She would serve her full sentence in a federal facility far from Colorado. Standing in that construction yard, watching Emma Morrison laugh with her father while designing buildings that would improve other people's lives, I understood that justice had been served not through punishment alone, but through restoration. Trevor's theft had been intended to destroy Jake Morrison's family. Instead, it had ultimately provided them with resources to thrive while pursuing meaningful work that helped their community. The lesson that emerged from that terrible Christmas day wasn't about revenge or punishment, but about the power of truth to restore balance when good people refuse to accept injustice. Bridget, Jake's voice interrupted my reflections. Yes? Emma and I have been talking about expanding the business. Accessible housing, but also adaptive equipment design, consulting with other construction companies. He paused, studying my face carefully. Would you consider becoming a full partner? Not just in business, but in everything we're building here? I looked at Jake Morrison, this honest man who'd endured years of hardship without becoming bitter, who'd raised a remarkable daughter while working 2 jobs, who'd chosen forgiveness over anger when justice finally arrived. Then I looked at Emma, brilliant and determined, designing solutions to problems that had limited her entire life, planning to use her challenges as motivation to help others. This wasn't the life I'd planned when I married Trevor Harrison 6 years ago, but it was infinitely better than anything I could have imagined during those dark months of discovering his betrayals. Yes, I said, feeling more certain than I'd felt about anything in years. I'd love to be part of what you're building. Emma cheered from her workbench, and Jake Morrison smiled with the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd learned to recognize real partnership when he found it. Sometimes the best revenge is building something beautiful from the wreckage someone else created. Sometimes justice looks like a 14-year-old girl designing accessible homes, while her father teaches her that integrity matters more than profit. Sometimes healing means choosing to love people who've proven they deserve it. The Christmas when my world collapsed had become the foundation for a life worth living, built on honesty, shared purpose, and the kind of love that grows stronger under pressure rather than crumbling when tested. Trevor Harrison had thought he was smart enough to escape consequences. Instead, his choices had led directly to accountability, restoration, and justice for everyone he'd tried to destroy. The truth really can set you free, especially when you're brave enough to speak it, even when it costs everything you thought you wanted. What would you have done if you discovered your partner's betrayal and criminal activity? Would you have had the courage to expose them publicly, knowing it meant destroying your own life to seek justice for their victims? Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and doing what's right for others? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear about times when you've had to find strength you didn't know you possessed. Thank you for listening to my story of that unforgettable Christmas when everything changed. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more true stories of resilience and justice, and share it with anyone who might need to hear that it's never too late to stand up for what's right. Remember, you have more power than you realize to change your circumstances and help others in the process. Until next time, keep believing that truth and justice really can prevail, even when the odds seem impossible.